Production funding for American Grown, provided by James G. Parker Insurance, protecting agribusiness in the Valley for over 40 years. Brandt Professional Agriculture, discovering, manufacturing, and supplying the ag inputs that support the heroes that work hard to feed a hungry world every day. By Unwired Broadband, today's internet for rural Central California, keeping Valley Ag connected since 2003. By Hodges Electric, trusted by builders to wire thousands of Valley homes, now bringing that trust direct to you. By Wawona Frozen Foods, fruit as it should be, family owned since 1963. By Harris Farms, a legacy of growing. By Harris & Co., providing family farms insight to make the best possible financial decisions. And by Valley Air Conditioning and Repair, family owned for over 50 years, dedicated to supporting Valley agriculture and families that grow food for the nation.
Just from a young age, being around, a dad who was in the industry, and then eventually being in high school, being involved in different organizations, there was a natural personal drive that led me to want to explore the industry even past high school. I've always kind of been somebody to put myself out of my comfort zone, so when it came to FFA, I decided I wanted to show animals. I decided I wanted to do some competitions where I did livestock judging, and eventually in college did horse judging. And so I just had this natural drive to explore this industry. And I think obviously, being involved in FFA, that really laid the foundation for the interest of, if I go on and study this in college, what could be the future for me beyond, just these organizations?
Agriculture is one of the oldest industries on Earth, and still one of the most important. It feeds us, it clothes us, it provides materials for homes we live in, and touches nearly every part of our lives every single day. But working in agriculture today doesn't necessarily mean driving a tractor, harvesting a crop, or even working directly on a farm. Modern agriculture needs scientists and engineers. It needs mechanics, crop advisors, researchers, and technology experts. And increasingly, it needs storytellers. Because in a world where more and more people are generations removed from the farm, telling the story of where our food comes from and the people who produce it has never been more important. And reaching the next generation means telling those stories in new ways, on new platforms, through voices they understand.
There was never going to be a good time. The time was now. I had thought about the idea for a couple of years of what Agrifluence could be, and you spend hours and weeks and years trying to develop the perfect business plan, but at the end of the day you just have to start. And I think taking the risk and just going for it and knowing, if this doesn't work out, I've built up a network in the industry. I can easily go find another 9-to-5 job. But I think the most important part was just looking long term. What is my dream? Am I going to look back when I'm 65 years old and maybe still working for another company, wishing that I had done this?
In agriculture, growing something from the ground up doesn't always mean planting a seed. Sometimes it means betting on yourself and seeing what grows.
I think let's start with kind of just like a engaging opening, just open it up a little bit, and I think that'll help kind of loosen you up too to start getting into the other things.
Outside of school, I actually got a job with one of the world's largest farming organizations doing international business and sales. And so that's really where I obtained almost a PhD in business. College laid the foundation for, just understanding the ethics of business and ag. But When I branched out and started my career, I had the opportunity to travel the world. I was in China, I was in Latin America, I was in Europe, I was all over. And that's where I really learned to, not only negotiate, make contracts, make sales, market, close deals, but just really the exposure to agriculture outside of the United States, and also just experiencing the cultures and what agriculture looks like in different places.
For Nicole, agriculture has never been something distant or unfamiliar. Raised in a farming family here in California's Central Valley, it was part of her life from the beginning. After graduating from Oklahoma State University, Nicole returned home and went straight to work in the industry, eventually finding herself involved in sales, marketing, and international markets, traveling the world and learning the business of agriculture from the inside out. But along the way, she began to recognize something else. Agriculture has an incredible story to tell, but telling that story well requires people who understand both the industry and the rapidly changing world of communication. For Nicole, those two worlds came together. The experience she gained in agriculture gave her the credibility to understand the people doing the work. And the tools of her generation gave her a new way to tell their stories.
Morning.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Hello,
How you doing?
you
too. Hi, how you doing?
Good. How
thank
about
you.
yourself?
Good. Fine, thank you. Just ready for it.
Ready
Just
to be
another
on
day.
camera? This is a cool shirt.
Oh, thank you.
I like
Yeah,
that.
I know
Very
it.
fancy. How's everything going since we last talked?
I know, I feel like it's been forever.
Have you been door to door making sales?
Trying.
Yeah.
I mean, I won't say making sales, but door to door for sure.
Making connections.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
So I actually already had a lot of camera gear because I was doing a lot of that work at my previous job. I did not have any clients lined up, but what I had was I had built up a network, and I will say that LinkedIn has been extremely foundational for my career. While I was at my previous role, I really started to build kind of a public face for myself on LinkedIn through posting photos and videos and just creating kind of this thought leadership persona for myself, really built up that network organically. So when I did branch out, people were curious, what is Agrifluence? And, once I did that, subtle introduction as to what it was, it kind of just clicked for the industry. People were curious, they were, interested. And so I think, it was all in God's plan, and I'm glad it worked out, but I didn't have any clients lined up. And I think that's the exciting part of it. I think if I would have already had those clients lined up, my story would be different. And I don't know if I would be in this position today. Every single day, I am my own boss. It depends on me where the business goes. And so I think having that drive every single day to build something that's impactful for the industry. I saw a gap when I was working for Boswell. And it was that, companies were marketing, but it was just very stale content. It was very corporate, and it really didn't show anything. And so, I feel that I've helped pave the way for highlighting agriculture in a different light.
You look stressed, Alyssa.
Yeah.
You're gonna be fine.
You're on the camera.
It really is.
Yeah.
In 2024, Nicole took the leap and launched Agrifluence, the culmination of a dream to build her own business while staying firmly connected to the industry that had shaped her life. The idea behind it was actually pretty simple. Farmers are really good at farming. Growers, ranchers, and the businesses that support them spend their days producing food, managing people, solving problems, and navigating an increasingly complex industry. But telling that story, especially in today's fast-moving digital world, requires a completely different set of skills. And Nicole saw an opportunity to help. Agrifluence works exclusively within food and agriculture, helping companies tell their stories through video and photography, social media, branding, websites, and strategic communication. Sometimes that means explaining a new technology, Sometimes it's introducing consumers to the people behind the food they eat. And sometimes it's simply helping an agricultural business communicate more clearly about what they do and why they do it. Because agriculture faces plenty of scrutiny today. Questions about water, land, technology, and environmental impact aren't going away. But Nicole believes the people actually doing this work deserve a voice in that conversation.
We're in grower orchards providing.
And for a generation that increasingly gets its information through a screen, that means taking the story of agriculture to where the audience already is.
Did you get what you wanted?
I think so. Yeah, I think we got enough. Yeah, I think it's stressful for everyone, but I think something that I love about this type of work is it's not scripted. We try to be authentic, and it's just kind of off the cuff. And I think that's how life is.
So I've known Nicole just over about a year now. She was first introduced to me by one of our partners when he first mentioned that we were going to be doing more content. And so we got introduced to her through some of her other videos that she had done with her past organizations, and we've really enjoyed the work that she did and found it very impressive and decided to make her a part of our team. Over the past years, we've come to understand the importance of digital advertisement, especially not only through social media, but through our online as well. So what we've decided to do is make a partnership with Nicole in order to have her deliver a lot of the content that we're putting out, as well as have her help us with some of the content that we put out personally.
It was good. So this is what I have from the email.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
oh, he already knows what he's
Yeah,
supposed to say. Okay.
exactly. Yeah.
He's here to get business done.
There definitely is a lot more correct information being delivered as opposed to having someone speak on your behalf. I think it does come over a lot clearer and more concise when you do have someone speaking directly from a company as opposed to, having a middleman. I think a lot more companies are gearing towards social media a lot more than they have in the past. I think it gives growers just a little bit of an edge up, companies an edge up, with information being delivered faster to consumers, and it gives a lot more opportunity for growers to have more interactions with each other and being able to learn off each other what they're doing in their fields and things like that. I just think social media and what Nicole is doing particularly is really providing a lot of gain to companies and growers themselves.
And then when you talk about the returns, instead of leading with what you do, you could just say the actual result of over 10 years, this is what we've seen, instead of closing with that, right?
Okay.
I feel like that,
More so opening with it.
yeah, see if that flows nicer.
We're in a time now where the workforce is changing. Kids graduate college, they're not really wanting to go back to the family farm. They're not even really wanting to work a 9-to-5. So I think that the work that, we're both doing for the industry highlights that pride and really helps highlight these businesses in a light that shows the people and the value that they bring. And all of our businesses, whether we're providing a product or a service, or we're actually the farmer providing the commodity itself, we're all serving one purpose, and it's to feed the world. And I'm hoping that with our work, we can help, pave the way for the next generation and keep that pride. I would definitely say, as I've had the opportunity to meet with, companies all across the United States and even internationally, there's definitely an interest as, at the younger generation level, but I think that's also influencing these older generations where, they're not quite on their way out yet, but they still, they want to find the way to where can we grow the business? What are the opportunities? What we previously did isn't working. Word of mouth is always going to be there. And I think, at the end of the day, for the industry we're in, shaking hands, breaking bread with a potential client, that will never go away. That will always be valuable. But finding ways to, market your company, your product, and your personal brand outside of just in-person interactions is huge and is really serving companies when they're off the clock.
For generations, the story of agriculture in California's Central Valley has largely been the story of families. Families who settled here, worked the land, raised their kids on the farm, and in many cases, passed that farm and everything they had learned from one generation to the next. But that landscape is changing. Farming today is an increasingly difficult business, and for smaller operations, the margins for survival can be incredibly thin. The cost of land, equipment, and labor continues to rise. Water has become more expensive, less predictable, and increasingly regulated. And complying with the rules that govern farming in California can require time, expertise, and money that a smaller operation simply doesn't have at the same scale as its larger competitors. The result is an agricultural landscape that is slowly consolidating. Between 2017 and 2022 alone, California lost roughly 10% of its farms, while the average size of the farms that remained grew larger. And it's worth asking why that matters. Because when a family farm disappears, we can lose more than acreage. We can lose generations of knowledge about a particular piece of ground. We can lose a family that has learned over decades which crops work here, how the soil responds there, when to irrigate, when to harvest, and how to adapt when conditions change. Small and mid-sized farms also help create the remarkable patchwork that has long defined California's agriculture. Different crops, different growing methods, different cultures, traditions, and ideas. And that diversity has value. It creates stronger rural communities. It spreads knowledge across more people and more operations. And in a food system facing an uncertain future, having more people who know how to grow more things in more ways is something worth protecting. None of this means large farms are the enemy. Scale has allowed agriculture to become incredibly efficient, producing more food with technology and precision previous generations could hardly have imagined. But there is room and a need for both. The question is how we make sure the next generation sees enough opportunity in agriculture to stay, or maybe even finds a reason to come back. And that's where this story connects again with Nicole, because preserving agriculture isn't only about preserving the way things used to be. It's also about finding new people with new ideas willing to fight for what agriculture can become. Nicole isn't doing that from the seat of a tractor. She's doing it with a camera, a phone, a laptop, and a belief that if people better understand the farmers behind their food, they might also better understand why keeping them here matters.
I had an experience that was very different from a lot of students, and I was very, very grateful for the opportunity to have a couple of mentors. A couple of those would be Ralph Loya and Gene Myers, and it almost actually makes me emotional thinking about it because that's part of the reason I'm in this chair today. They were the mentors that eventually led me to make the decision to show cattle, to get out of my comfort zone and do livestock judging and eventually do collegiate horse judging at Oklahoma State University. These individuals personally took it upon them to take time out of their day, not only to introduce themselves to me, but also teach me how to write a resume, teach me how to show a cow, teach me how to apply for college, and also help me get out of my comfort zone. These experiences have been so huge in the development of me public speaking, of me, having those personable skills that you need in business.
How are things for you?
Things are good, yeah. Tomorrow is 1 year of business,
way.
yeah. So it's a
Congratulations.
celebratory week for sure.
It's an advantage.
I think it looks nice. And then I think that this,
We can bring in a light too.
okay, I think a light will be
Probably gonna
nice.
a lot of green coming off this tree.
Yeah. There is some funky shadows happening on your face.
Yeah, we need to move this.
And then, yeah, I like that.
I just think Nicole's great. I think being women in this industry, I think there is sometimes, I don't think not that we're not given the opportunity, but I think some people think that we can't do it as well as men. But I think Nicole really just is amazing at what she does, and she does show that women are powerful and we can do pretty much anything.
Agriculture is changing, and there's no question that the people who grow our food are facing some enormous challenges. Water, regulation, rising costs, changing markets, an increasingly complicated world that asks farmers and ranchers to produce more with less and to somehow keep making it all work. Sometimes I think we forget what an extraordinary thing that is. These are the people who feed us. They get up every morning, take enormous risks, battle weather and markets and circumstances largely beyond their control, and they keep going. There is something incredibly noble about that. And if agriculture is going to remain strong, we need to understand its importance. We need to value the people doing the work. And we need to make sure another generation sees agriculture not simply as an industry facing challenges, but as an industry filled with opportunity. Because change creates opportunity. And Nicole saw it. She recognized that agriculture needed a better way to tell its story. She took the skills of her generation, combined them with a lifelong connection to farming, bet on herself, and built a business around helping agriculture succeed.
Let's see if I have it.
And now, nearly 2 years later, that business is growing. More clients, more employees, more young people finding their own place in an industry that might look very different from the agriculture their parents and grandparents knew.
Bring the energy, Ernie. You got it.
And maybe that's the real lesson here. Agriculture has always been about growth. Growing crops, growing food, growing communities and families. But its future will also depend on growing new ideas, new businesses, new opportunities, and a new generation willing to step forward and find their own way to keep agriculture growing.
Leaving my full-time job was the biggest risk up until this point that I've ever taken. And it took some time to really make that decision. It wasn't like I hated my job and I was just ready to leave and rage quit. It was I had something huge that I could build upon for years and years and years. I could establish a exceptionally professional career at this company. And it just got to the point where I had to, look at both cards and say, am I gonna go the safe route or am I gonna follow my dream? And when I looked at it, I knew, I could get another pay raise. I could get more vacation. I could get all of these things, but at the end of the day, is that what's going to make me happy? And when I reflected, it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about traveling on private jets, around the globe. It was, what makes me happy at the core? And I knew having a camera in my hand, working with people in the industry, and making an impact that could, spread across more than just one company was what I wanted to do. So that's when I knew I had to chase the dream, I had to chase the idea, and there was no better time than now.
Production funding for American Grown, provided by James G. Parker Insurance, protecting agribusiness in the Valley for over 40 years. Brandt Professional Agriculture, discovering, manufacturing, and supplying the ag inputs that support the heroes that work hard to feed a hungry world every day. By Unwired Broadband, today's internet for rural Central California, keeping Valley Ag connected since 2003. By Hodges Electric, trusted by builders to wire thousands of Valley homes, now bringing that trust direct to you. By Wawona Frozen Foods, fruit as it should be, family owned since 1963. By Harris Farms, a legacy of growing. By Harris & Co., providing family farms insight to make the best possible financial decisions. And by Valley Air Conditioning and Repair, family owned for over 50 years, dedicated to supporting Valley agriculture and families that grow food for the nation.